So moving forward, how do you think socialism, getting a little bit more personal now, a little more local, how do you think socialism affects the family structure as opposed to capitalism? Anyone want to chime in on that one?
Okay, I'm going to start because I come from a former communist country. It's very interesting because my answer might surprise you, because what modern day socialists think of the family, it's basically everything is the liberal, let's say liberal philosophy, not necessarily liberal politics, which is also not liberal anymore in the classical sense of liberalism. In Romania, the family was seen as the cell of society. So the state put a lot of emphasis on the family, and it was, there was almost like a huge pressure on every individual to get married and have children, because children were necessary for the state to work. And to have like a good functioning socialism, you have to have a lot of people, you have to have a lot of workers, obviously proletarians, how they're called. So you might think that everything looked good, everything's in pink, because families respected, families were incentivized. You'd be paid even more. I think you would be paid 10% more in Romania if you get one child, and that would increase the more children you would have. However, there was a lot of pressure on women. Women were supposed to have a family, have children, go to work, and do all sorts of jobs. And if you want to see feminism, like what feminists want today, you should look at communist Romania, because they did all sorts of jobs, all sorts of masculine jobs, like hardcore physical work. However, what happened at some point, because people started to see that my children will become the slaves of the state. So that ended up in one of the most horrible demographic crisis in the world, because women wanted to do abortion. They wanted to abort their children because they were afraid, thinking about the future. There was such a heavy, dark pessimism about it that you would think that I don't want to say that I'm for that, obviously, but how they saw it is that, why should you torture a human being knowing that there's no future? So abortion was banned. It was illegal to do abortion, so they did it illegally. And we had the highest mortality rate for women in the world at some point in the late 60s. There was a decree in 68 that banned all contraception in Romania, and because of the pressures the state put on women, it just crashed, and you had this horrible, tragic episode in Romanian history. So the point is that when the state starts to get personally involved with the family life, it's never going to end up good. What I really believe is that states should always protect the core family, a husband and a wife and children, because that's how society works. That's what we know that worked in history. It always worked in history. We don't see the Amazons like founding an empire that lasted 1,500 years or something. It crashed immediately. So the Christian understanding of family is the only one that works. It's the only one that can produce healthy children and provide for a good future.
Yeah, it's very, very good. Yeah, it's interesting because even the health and wealth of nations is analyzed and comes to a consensus of based upon the health and wealth of families. So the family structure is very, very important, and protecting it even more so. Well, I will give you one little tidbit, because when the government or there's a central power in place, everything, including children and their education and their values, all have to come in line with that of the state. So even children, humanity, is viewed in a socialistic, communistic society as that of possession of the state, which removes parental rights, which God instituted, and it diminishes the importance of parental control and that of instilling Christian values, because in a socialistic, communistic society, we know what happens to families, because children are the future. Children are our collective future. And when we are limited or persecuted even for trying to instill godly principles into our children, that's going to directly affect not only their future, but our collective future as well. So I just wanted to throw that tidbit of information in there. All right, we're going to wrap this whole thing up. Oh, go ahead, Monica.
Like, that is even happening nowadays, though, in some states, and the way that the government wants to be involved into like what they feed into our children in the school, yeah, especially with the whole sexual agenda. Like, it starts like at what age now? Like,
for majority in America, it's 5 years old.
Right? So 5 years old, and they need to know about all these things. Like a 5-year-old shouldn't be like being fed into, and or if you want us to go ahead and start, like, let's say, sex education, as parents, we know what is best for our children. Like, what makes you think like the government knows what is best for my child? So we see like glimpses of that idea, but imagine if it becomes like the norm. Like, what is that about?
Yeah, it's a very dangerous path to tread. I will say this too. It's very interesting that during the coronavirus crisis or pandemic, the World Health Organization became on the forefront. It was, the spotlight was shone on it. And something very interesting that the majority of people don't understand is that the World Health Organization sets the standard of sexuality education for the world's children. And many different governments, unions, even different teachers, populations rather, they look at the World Health Organization and different governing bodies as credible sources of how they should implement new education or curriculum to teach our children. And one element of their sexuality education was to teach 10 to 12-year-olds the difference between their values, their personal values at 10 and 12 compared to that of their parents. And when that happens, the children are affirmed in the child's values, not that of the parents. And that's a very dangerous thing, because the children want to say the right thing and what the teacher is teaching them as opposed to what they're being taught at home. And when children are affirmed by the state or by unions or by teachers who do not have a solid basis of morality in which they can refer to, that child will lean more upon that teacher or the teaching of the state as opposed to that of the values of this family structure. And the reason why they do this, even with this sexual education, is because they want to teach the child to rely upon the state more and more. And because we see higher increases of, let's say, early teen pregnancy, which results in abortions or drives condom sales, multiple different factors, which drives a different industry, which is connected directly to a socialistic, communistic kind of style of thinking and belief. So it's very important that we understand, even with sexual education, it removes the rights of parents and families, as well as stripping away values. So very great point, Monica. I really appreciate that.